All right. Wow. Welcome, everybody. Avinu Makeh. Oh, wait, no. Anyway. So welcome, everybody. I'm Rabbi Karen Levine. I am the second Woodstocker Rebbe. Is that? So I'm the rabbi here at Woodstock Jewish Congregation, and I'm just so glad you are all here. This really means a lot to me. So just a few little housekeepings. First of all, please silence your phones. And just to let you know that we are recording this for Zoom, so you are not responsible to document it. Okay, so it'd be really helpful if you can refrain from that, because it can be just distracting for people around you if you take out your phone and start taking pictures or video. So I hope that that's okay for you. And to remember, this is a sanctuary. So let's consider that for everybody that's here, that if a sanctuary means safety, that one of the ways that we can ensure the safety for each of us is for each of us to take responsibility for holding this as a safe space. So we will run until, I don't know, about 8:30, 8:40, and then there'll be plenty of time for book signing afterwards in the back. And I think you all got cards when you came in. So if you want to ask some questions, we ask that you write them on the cards. We will collect the cards, we will sort the cards, we will prioritize the cards. There's so many of us here that to just an open Q&A would be a little bit unmanageable for us. So I hope that we'll get to as many questions as possible, and we'll do our best. We'll leave plenty of time to address these questions, and we'll prioritize the hardest questions go first. So hopefully that'll cover as much as what everybody wants to hear. I want to especially who are here, who it's their generosity and their trust that is making it possible for us to host this event tonight. If you are a member of the Woodstock Jewish Congregation, can you please stand up? Beautiful. Thank you. I want to thank our incredible team here at the Woodstock Jewish Congregation. Tara is over in the doorway, and Deborah. Tara's our administrator. Deborah, I was trying to think of your title, and all I could come up with is Minch. So for the people who in this room know what that is, Deb is just a wonderful, great person, and great to work with you. And also acknowledge Noah, who is on our running the tech for us tonight. Also acknowledging Ellie Kramer is here somewhere. There's Ellie, she's our president. And our whole board, there are many board members here tonight who, again, work so hard and have had so much, nachas this week. They've just done such a great job, so thank you for being here and doing all that you do. And how many are on Zoom, Noah? It's like 100
almost 180.
We have 180 joining us on Zoom. So I also just want to thank you all for joining us via Zoom. I particularly want to recognize that there are many young adults, particularly on Zoom, joining us who grew up in this congregation and are tuning in this evening. And I want to thank you for being here. It means a lot to me. And that you continue to look to the Woodstock Jewish Congregation to help you navigate how hard it is to be a Jew, particularly a young Jewish person in the world today. So thank you. All right, now is our custom to say hello to the people who are sitting next to you. So we'll just take a quick, just turn to a person or two near you and say hello to them. all day, of course, but we'll stop there, and there'll be time to greet each other again at the end of the program. I would now like to introduce Alice Radosh to come up and welcome you on behalf of Jewish Currents. You need a microphone. Yes, here you go.
Microphone, but this is a terrific crowd. I'm Alice Radosh. I'm very pleased to welcome you on behalf of Jewish Currents, the co-sponsor of tonight's program. Jewish Currents has been around for 79 years. It's a progressive, secular magazine, website, podcast, and sponsor of events like this. So I'm very glad to have all of you here, and I am particularly proud of the fact that Peter Beinart is an editor-at-large at Jewish Currents. So it's terrific. So I've been with Jewish Currents for about 18 years, currently serve as the chair of one of their advisory groups, and I've also been with the Woodstock Jewish Congregation, a member on and off for almost 30 years. So it's with both hats that I welcome Peter to not only to Woodstock, but to this congregation. It really is a fabulous congregation. So welcome. There are a number of Jewish Currents people here. I was at the table out front. Thank you for coming by. If you're a subscriber and haven't introduced yourself, please come afterwards. When I'm out there, I'd like to meet you. And if you're not a subscriber, definitely come to the table and I will talk you into subscribing. Progressive Judaism needs all of you, so thank you for coming. The Golden Notebook that's going to be out there, I want to thank them. They have been terrific in promoting this event in so many ways. They'll be selling Peter's book. Peter will be signing the book. You know, what more can I say except that, again, welcome to Peter. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming. And thank you for being concerned about what's happening in Israel and Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Okay, so we're here today to witness a conversation between two people who care deeply about Judaism and the Jewish people, and who are willing to take the risk of sitting here today to have a heart-filled and deep conversation about some very difficult topics that have been divisive both in the Jewish community and in the world at large. We're not here to change anybody's minds. We're here to listen, to practice listening to viewpoints and ideas that we may not agree with, without shutting each other down or losing sight of the humanity of the speaker. Our job is to listen generously. And I know this might be hard, but I ask that you refrain from reacting audibly to anything you hear tonight. This is a sanctuary, and again, we want to each be guardians of the sanctuary to keep everybody feeling safe. And I know you can do this. So I therefore also ask that you refrain from applause, that you refrain from cheering and booing. This is not a debate. We will not solve any of the problems here today, except hopefully the problem of being afraid to sit down together and talk about such things. And that is why we're here. When we gather on the Jewish Holy Night of Kol Nidrei in this very sanctuary, we begin with a prayer that's called permission. And this prayer asks us to admit that we are not perfect and to grant permission to everyone else in the room to also not be perfect. So, when you feel a reaction coming up, notice it. Feel it in your body. But please hold it to yourself. The person sitting next to you, who you just met, is a great person with a lot of heart and caring. But that person may not have the same reaction that you're having. And your reaction may feel separating for them. And separation is not why we're here. So this is not a college lecture hall. This is not, thankfully, town hall, where another meeting is happening at this time, as far as I know, and I hope that they can listen to each other also with the same grace that we will here. And we're not advocating for anything you hear today. We're not advocating for Peter's viewpoint. We're not advocating for Rabbi Jonathan's viewpoint. Each of these men is here as themselves. So I would next like to invite my colleague, my dear colleague, Cantor Rachel Rosen. So we will officially open our evening, recognizing that each of us has had a full day today. We've been somewhere else. We have a lot on our minds. And we want to get as fully present, to be as fully present in this moment as we can. And the way we like to do that is with a song. And some of you may know this. Olam chesed yibaneh. Olam, like forever. Chesed, loving kindness, unbounded, unconditional love. And yibaneh is to build, to establish. We will build, we will establish a world with love.
Olam chesed yibaneh, Olam chesed yibaneh, Olam chesed yibaneh, yaladai, Olam chesed yibaneh, yaladai. We will build this world from love. Yaladai, yaladai. We will build this world from love. Yaladai, yaladai. We will build this world from love. Yaladai, yaladai. We will build this world from love. Yaladai, yaladai.
And now to introduce our speakers. Peter Beinart teaches national opinion writing at the Newmark J School and political science at the CUNY Graduate Center. He's the editor-at-large of Jewish Currents, an MSNBC political commentator, author of the Beinart Notebook on Substack, a fellow at the Foundation for Middle East Peace, and the author of several books, but most recently, Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, A Reckoning. Rabbi Jonathan Kligler is Rabbi Emeritus of this institution, Kehillat Lev Shalem, the Woodstock Jewish Congregation. He is a renowned and beloved teacher of Torah. He's the author of several books, including Turn It and Turn It, for Everything is in It, essays on the weekly Torah portion. He's now devoting himself to writing and teaching and sharing the joys of music. And you can read his latest essays on his Substack publication, Turn It and Turn It.
Greetings to everybody, and greetings to you, Peter. We got to speak for a while, so I got to meet him already. So as Rabbi Karen said, we're not going to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict tonight. I'm sorry. But let that be an invitation to you not to raise the stakes so high that you're adrenalized, and keep breathing. Keep breathing. In this room, even if we hear things that we disagree with, no one's being personally attacked, and thank God no one's in physical danger. So we don't have to react that way. We have a choice. Oh, what a mess this world is. This gathering is a mixed gathering. We're not the anti-Zionist crowd. Some of us are anti-Zionists here. We're certainly not the, quote, Jewish establishment crowd. That's not the position the Woodstock Jewish Congregation has ever occupied, even though we have many, many people who consider themselves Zionist in this congregation. But you'll notice we've never had flags on our bima. We don't have an Israeli flag, we don't have an American flag, we don't have a Palestinian flag on our bima, because, and I appreciate taking the cue from the legacy of Woodstock, we aim to be a spiritual community, not an ethnic cheering club, not a political organization. Our members are all encouraged and always to belong to the political organizations that they speak to them most deeply and the causes they care about. But here we practice something else, and that is trying to be welcoming to everyone who walks in the door, practicing being our best selves. Hopefully, as a synagogue, as a spiritual community, we take that energy out into the world with us. So, I say all that to say that here we are in the messy and uncertain middle, the huge, messy, and uncertain middle that is our world right now. I made up a phrase, which is, I choose messiness, not messianism. Messianism is a binary. It's like, we know where we're headed, we know who's going to get there, we know what the right path is, whatever it is, political or spiritual or any other version. But here we are inhabiting messiness. It's very uncomfortable. The world is a frightening place. But that's reality. And we want to be in reality here. Most of us are aware of how little influence we have over United States policy, let alone Israel policy. Most of us are in anguish. Most of the people I know who are hanging out in the messy middle. We care deeply. We're afraid. And then, when it comes to a Jewish issue, as we're discussing tonight, there's the Afro-Jewish community. Not all of us here are Jewish, but we're in a Jewish community right now. For each Jew, somewhere inside, there is fear. Fear that we will not survive. It makes us act crazy if we let it. But to not acknowledge that we're in a terrifying situation, both in our nation and as we observe the catastrophes going on in Israel and Gaza, is to pretend. And I said I want to be in reality here. So in addition to the thoughts we're going to share, I want us to acknowledge our emotional reality, which right now, I don't know about you, but let's just say I have good days and bad days these days. and so do you, and we're all in this together. Having said that, Peter, you're not preaching to your anti-Zionist gathering here. You're also not just having to stand up to the American Jewish establishment major voices which have gone lockstep in supporting Israel, those two extremes. You're talking to the messy middle. And I wanted to ask you, what do you want to say to this well-intentioned messy middle? That's how I wanted to start this.
Well, thank you. I mean, the first thing I want to say is thank you for having me. Can you hear me? Yes. It's really an honor to be here with Jonathan and Karen, and I wanted to especially thank Alice Radosh, who did so much to make this possible. And I see my old dear friend Erica Blumberg is here, and so it's wonderful to be here. And I especially, some of the things that were said earlier resonate. When I look out at it, I've been doing some book events, and I always look out and I kind of try to imagine like who in the audience is the person who disagrees with me most fervently, and then I think like how lucky I am that that person came, because it's so rare often, I think, for people to go out of their way to listen to people who they know are going to aggravate them or make them uncomfortable, say things they disagree with. And I really admire people from whatever political perspective who do that. It says in Pirkei Avot, who is wise? The one who learns from all people. And I always feel like the person who travels the furthest distance to be willing to learn from someone is showing the greatest wisdom. So if you're that person, I'm really grateful to you. I think that, to me, one of the things that I've always found fascinating and beautiful about Judaism is this tension between a religion that I think is built around the metaphor of family. Genesis is mostly the story of a family, and then in Exodus, the family becomes a people. And there's this kind of quasi-familial relationship with other Jews that certainly I was raised with, and I think it is in our sacred texts as well. Even as Jews move from being a family to being a nation, we are called Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. Right? Israel is the name that Jacob is given after he wrestles with the angel. So we have we are from this common family. But also a religion that has a universal moral message that centers the idea of the infinite kind of preciousness of all human life, irrespective of whether you're in our family or not. Because Torah doesn't start with the story of the Jewish family. The first people we meet in Torah, Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, the generation of Noah, the people who built the Tower of Babel, none of those were Israelites or Jews. They're universal human beings. And so I think that I felt after October 7th that I was again and again in Jewish spaces where the familial voice within Judaism was incredibly powerful and incredibly beautiful. That I was again and again and again in spaces where we were told the names of the Israelis who had been massacred, who had been taken captive on October 7th. We were praying for them in my shul constantly. We met their relatives, we heard their stories of their families, and it was very frequently, I just saw everyone in the room was in tears. But in a way, the very power and beauty of that element within Judaism, for me, underscored in a very, very painful and disturbing way the absence of what I felt like was the other voice. Because in all of the Jewish spaces that I was in, month after month after month after month after October 7th, I never heard the name of a Palestinian who was killed. Often there was no mention of Palestinians being killed at all. But even if there was some kind of fleeting mention, there was never a name. There was never a humanization of those people. And that seemed to me to be a kind of recreation of Judaism as a kind of purely tribal creed. And that's not what Judaism is for me. And so I wanted to try to understand why it was that many people who I admire, care about, live my life alongside, love, people who I think are in so many aspects of their lives really decent, thoughtful, open-minded, curious people, I felt like were comfortable with this response, seemed to have somehow managed to go day in and day out and not truly see the images that were kind of seemed to me all around us of what was happening in Gaza day after day after day. And it felt to me that there was a story that was very, very pervasive in many, many Jewish spaces that was kind of separating us from our best selves and separating us from the idea that that all human beings are created in the image of God. And because all human beings are created in the image of God, that it is fundamentally un-Jewish to ignore or rationalize mass destruction and mass death, as I feel like the leaders of the American Jewish community have been doing now for a year and a half. And it was, so that my book was an effort to interrogate that story and to suggest perhaps a different kind of story about what it means to be Jewish that I think could reawaken some of the traditions that we have that don't center our allegiance to a state. Because for me, there's very little that I see in Jewish texts that speaks to the obligation to have an allegiance to a state. But there is a great deal that speaks to our allegiance to respect and recognize and protect human life. That, to me, the Torah says much more emphatically that human beings have a right to exist than that any particular state has a right to exist in any particular form. And so that was what I was thinking about when I read the book, when I wrote the book. That was the idea that I was trying to take across.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things Peter and I share is a devotion to Jewish learning, Jewish ethics, understanding Jewish teaching. So I appreciate, one of the reasons I could read his book and receive it, even if I don't agree with all of his conclusions, is because it was coming out of a deeply Jewish place, and that's my language. But I want to get right to one of the what for me is one of the difficult places, which is the question of Zionism and anti-Zionism. This isn't about me, but just so you know, it's like my grandfather was a founder of the Hebrew University, and my father was born in Jerusalem. My parents are buried there. My brother lives there. My cousins, my best friends. I have two homes, right? And I've been devoted to my two homes. And in the last couple of years especially, since October 7th and since the November election, especially in this country, I've been experiencing intense grief and shame about the venality and the cruelty and the lack of just the loss of values that I consider to be central to both my American understanding of what it means to be a person and my Jewish and Israeli understanding. So Zionism is a core identity of mine. And I refuse to cede the term. I'm not willing to cede the term to the ethno-nationalist, intolerant version of Zionism that rules Israel right now. And I have many friends and colleagues in Israel who also refuse to cede that term. Zionism can be, there are many streams of Zionism, just like there are many streams of every nationalist movement, from the most universal understanding of the purpose of nation states to the most fascist understanding of states as an end in themselves. The fact that Zionism has been taken over in the main conversation in Israel in this way, and if you've gone to any of the demonstrations against the government in Israel, which I've been to many, they have reclaimed the Israeli flag so that they can say, we also are patriots of this country, and we oppose you. So, I'm the kind of Zionist who believes that both Jews and Palestinians have the right to self-determination and the right to live with dignity and security in their land. I consider myself at this point part of the loyal opposition, both in this country and in my other home, Israel. And I'm putting all my resources and energy now into supporting Jews and Arabs in Israel and in the occupied territories who are working with each other for a shared society. There are many, many such non-governmental groups. So my question is, why Davka, and I won't try to explain that word, why you have embraced the term anti-Zionism? And does that not negate Zionists like me? And where are we to go with this terminology? You follow me, right?
Thank you. Yeah. It's interesting, actually, nowhere in the book, nor anywhere else in my writing have I said I'm an anti-Zionist.
You know, you're right.
But I think it goes to the very point you're making, which is this question about what the term means. And I think one of the things about the term is a term that is a very intimate term, and has a great, great meaning for many, many people, but I think is defined very, very differently by many people. And so I think it's actually not productive to talk about Zionism without defining, as you did, what we mean by it. So let me tell you how I think about it. Before the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, Zionism meant a very broad array of different things. You mentioned Hebrew University. Hebrew University is founded by Judah Magnus, a very important cultural Zionist figure, who, like Martin Buber and like Henrietta Schulte, the founder of Hadassah,
And like my grandfather.
opposed, I don't know if your grandfather did, but Magnus and Buber and Schulte, all of whom considered themselves Zionists, opposed the creation of Israel as a Jewish state. Noam Chomsky, as a very young person, was a member of a Zionist youth movement that opposed the creation of Israel as a Jewish state. All of these people supported a binational state. And that's because cultural Zionism before the creation of the state could mean not support for a Jewish state, but support for a Jewish society, for a thriving Jewish culture, Hebrew language that could resonate around the world. That kind of Zionism is very appealing to me. And it's the reason I don't call myself an anti-Zionist, because the cultural Zionism of Buber and Magnus and Schulte and others, going all the way back to the thinker who wrote under the pen name Achad Ha'am, I find very compelling, because I think there is something deeply special and precious about a thriving Hebrew-speaking Jewish community in the land of Israel. There are literally certain mitzvot that can only be performed in the land of Israel. So I don't think it's not irrelevant to me whether you have a thriving Jewish community in the land of Israel. It's very, very important to me. It's very precious to me. But the political Zionism that emerged in 1948 is one that I do not support, for I think some of the same reasons that Magnus and Buber and Schulte did. And it's because at a very foundational level, I believe that if the theological principle that I believe in is that all human beings are created equal in the image of God, for me, the political manifestation of that is that states should treat people equally under the law, irrespective of their race, religion, and sex. And for that reason, I don't believe in states that give legal privilege, legal supremacy to members of any particular ethnic or religious groups. It's why I would never want America to be a Christian state. It's why I tremble when I see India turning into a Hindu state. It's why I was inspired by the Arab Spring and the efforts to turn Muslim states into liberal democracies. And so I don't believe in the idea of a Jewish state, because I think it's in conflict with the principle of equality under the law. And now it's true that we have a particular manifestation of that kind of political Zionism today that is very, very difficult and leads people like you to be in the loyal opposition. But I think it would be a mistake to sanitize the political Zionism that existed earlier in Israel's history, right? David Ben-Gurion, who was a secular socialist, oversaw the expulsion of more than half of the Palestinian population at Israel's founding. This is one of the reasons that Buber opposed the Jewish state. He could foresee that the creation of a Jewish state could only be possible
through an act of mass expulsion of Palestinians because there were simply too many Palestinians around. Even the state that was given by the UN as the Jewish part of that partition had an almost 50% Palestinian population, and Palestinians lived on most of the land. It could not have been a genuinely Jewish state without getting rid of a lot of Palestinians. In Israel from 1948 to 1966, under secular socialists, not people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, Palestinian citizens lived under military law. They needed military permission to be outside of their village at night. The settlement project that began in 1967 was begun by the Labor Party. It was accelerated by Likud under Menachem Begin, but the first settlements were created under the labor governments of the 1970s. So unfortunately, I say this with sadness, see a lot of continuity within the structure of political Zionism, in which there's always been the sense that this state belongs to Jews in a way that it does not belong to Palestinians, and Palestinians have never had political equality, which I think they deserve.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you more about that, but I think I wanted to note, I need to note that that thumbnail version of political Zionist history, I can give a different version. Right. And I don't want to take up all our time with it. But for instance, Palestinian citizens of Israel were under martial law in Israel for 19 years, partly because there was a low-level war going on that entire time. Israel was not some powerful state that had, so we could talk about this. So what I want to point out is that there's a spin there that it was part of my concern about your book. That there's a spin in some of the histories that you lay out that for an uninformed reader reads as the history. And there are many ways to tell this history. Israel was in a fight for its absolute survival in the War of Independence 3 years after the Holocaust. We can tell that story too. And they had no choice but to win in order to survive. Okay, is that true? Is that not true? There are so many ways to tell history, and so we need to be careful.
Yes, I am fallible. I'm subjective. I read I don't claim to have an objective truth, although I think that the way that I narrate Israel's creation, I don't think is far from the way that most Israeli historians at this point who have gone through the sources would say this. I do agree with you that Israel was, in a way we don't disagree that Israel was in a fight for its life as a Jewish state, but I think that perhaps the difference is that at the core of why I believe Israel was in a kind of fight for its life as a Jewish state was that the act of creating a Jewish state forced it to expel most of the Palestinians who were there, and those mass expulsions began, it's worth remembering, before the Arab armies invaded in April of 1948. Haifa and Jaffa, the two largest Palestinian population centers, were ethnically cleansed before May 1948, when Israel declared independence and the Arab countries invaded. So yes, were Israelis terribly frightened? Absolutely, terribly frightened. Especially, did the shadow of the Holocaust loom over Israelis? Absolutely. Many of those soldiers had numbers tattooed on their arms. Absolutely. But because I believe that act of mass expulsion was in many ways the trigger for what led to the violence that has endangered Israelis and Palestinians ever since. I mean, if we look at Gaza, right, most of the people in Gaza are the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of people who were expelled from Israel in 1948. Most of the people who committed the terrible terrorist acts of the 1970s were the children of Palestinians who were expelled in 1948. So that's why I would have favored Buber's vision, Magnus's vision of an equal binational state. Because I think if you had not had that original act of terrible, terrible violence, the mass dispossession of an entire society, I think that relations between Jews and Palestinians would be safer and more peaceful today.
Thank you. So again, we shouldn't spend our entire time litigating or describing history. However, my grandfather happened to be a colleague of Buber and Magnus and Henrietta Sold. This happens to be my family history. He was a professor at the Hebrew University who worked with all groups in British Mandate Palestine in eradicating malaria. That's my family story. One of the problems with the binationals, with the Brit Shalom, the intellectuals at the Hebrew University who wanted to do what this really ideal vision of a binational society, is that the Palestinian society was ruled by the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was an absolutist, an extremist, who, if any Palestinians who attempted to collaborate with their Jewish people who shared this idea of possibly creating a shared society were silenced, murdered. It's a two-way story. So we should teach a course together. How long can you stay? Because Peter's right and I'm right. And this is part of the problem. What we are facing is an historical tragedy. And where I think I disagree is that it could have been different. I wish it could have been different. The Brit Shalom, my grandfather's group, had no Arab partners because they were either exiled by the British or silenced by the Palestinian leadership themselves. There was no there.
It's interesting. I mean, I think you may well be right historically. I think you are right that there was not a lot of support by Palestinians for binationalism in 1947, 1948. But it is interesting how history turns, because Edward Said, in his final years, one of the final pieces of writing, an essay in the New York Times Magazine, actually picked up the idea of binationalism and the idea of a equal binational state. So I think if that idea has significantly more support today among Palestinians than it did in 1947, 1948. We can't turn back the clock.
Right.
But to me, it is the representation of a principle of equality under the law that I believe is important to fight for around the world. And one of the things that I worry is that when Jews make an exception to this principle for Israel and say we're going to fight with everything we have to defend the principle of equality under the law here and to fight against America becoming a white Christian ethno-nationalist state, but we're going to make an exception for Israel because we're a small group of people and we've had a very, very painful past. The problem is that exception doesn't actually stay in Israel. Right? So one of the things we see now is that Israel's part of a very formidable alliance. Israel in many ways is the model for people like Viktor Orban, the AfD in Germany, Marine Le Pen in France, and for much of Trump's Republican Party. They say, we want a country with clear hierarchies between different racial, religious, ethnic groups, which only allows in immigrants of a particular dominant group. And we see that America's most powerful Jewish institutions are so wedded to preserving American support for ethno-nationalism in Israel, that they're even willing to become allies of people in the United States who want to create an ethno-nationalist United States, even though most Jews know in our bones that puts us in danger. Right? That our safety, and I think to me the irony, and I'll stop, I don't want to go on too long, the irony of the idea that ethno-nationalism, that Jewish supremacy keeps Jews safe, is that Israel is probably the most dangerous large Jewish community in the world to be a Jew, even though it's the place that Jews have supremacy, that Jews are safer in countries that are based on the idea of equality under the law, because supremacy involves structural violence against people who are legal inferiors. And that violence ultimately makes everybody less safe.
On this, we agree. Liberal democracies, for me, I agree, are the best method of ensuring the safety of minorities. And we're in deep trouble in our world right now. Let me move towards asking you this question. So I'm so happy you clarified that you do not call yourself an anti-Zionist, and you do not. You speak with many people who claim that as a title. And so I guess my question is, what do you have to say to them about being anti-Zionist, since you don't claim to be an anti-Zionist? Because, people like me, for whom Zionism is a core identity, I've had a couple of years now to talk to a lot of anti-Zionists, and my goal is always to connect. So it's like I'm listening, and I still don't get it. That you would want to negate there's something negating about that. It's an anti-position. So what do you speak with the anti-Zionists? How do you talk about that with them?
Well, I think there are a lot of anti-Zionism is at this point an old Jewish tradition, right? I mean, the Satmar Rebbe is an anti-Zionist, right? Because Zionism, as you know, was originally considered a profound violation of Jewish law. Because the normative Jewish interpretation of the Masechet Ketubot in the Talmud was that Jews could not recreate sovereignty until Messianic times, right? That's why even organizations like Chabad, you'll notice, don't have Israeli flags, don't say Hatikva, don't say Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut, because Chabad Lubavitch used to be a profoundly anti-Zionist organization for that same theological reason. So if people want to interpret the Talmud that way, they have the right to interpret it that way. For people who are more, you could say, left Zionists, I would say their argument, I think, to someone like me would be, Peter, your cultural Zionism is not the Zionism that exists. It's not the Zionism. It is not. Zionism is what the Israeli state does. It's the ideology of the state. And so they would say, I'm in opposition to the ideology of this state because I don't believe in a political system that's based on legal supremacy for one group, and therefore I'm an anti-Zionist. And I think especially, one of the things that's very painful, but I think is worth remembering, is that in a way Zionism, the term, means almost as much to Palestinians as it means to Jews. And so as much as Jews feel, we want to hold this term because it's something precious to us, for Palestinians the term is very, very painful. For Palestinians the term evokes expulsion, oppression, the destruction of an entire society. So I know many Jews who say, I call myself an anti-Zionist as a way of honoring my Palestinian friends and colleagues and their experience, because I know how painful it is for them to hear this term being evoked because what it has meant for their family. And so I end up in a different place, but I respect that.
Okay. I certainly do not begrudge Palestinians from being anti-Zionist. But I also think that, again, I'll try to be really concise. I think it's again a little facile and confusing to talk about a long tradition of Jewish anti-Zionism and compare that to the current upswell of anti-Zionism as a mass movement on the left. And whenever I try to explain the history of political left-wing anti-Zionism, which you write about in your book, originates with Soviet propaganda campaign to disenfranchise, to isolate Israel. It was, in other words, maybe not originate.
Not originate.
Okay,
yeah.
but it was popularized and spread along with. The Soviets were unbelievable anti-Semites and used the Elders of the Protocols of Zion as they mounted their campaign in the 70s to get Zionism branded as racism in the UN.
Right.
It's like so much of the people who then took their lead on the left from communist thought and propaganda absorbed this. And so when I try to discuss this, I get blank stares. And I think it's important to understand that there are also anti-Semitic roots in the contemporary anti-Zionism that I have trouble talking about with people. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes. So I think you are absolutely right, and I talk in my book that there's no question that the Soviet anti-Zionism that really particularly becomes strong after the Soviet Union breaks from Israel after the 1967 war often involves uses of anti-Semitic tropes. To be fair, there was a lot of anti-Zionism in Russian politics before they became communists too, right? So in a lot of ways, what we're talking about is a Russian anti-Semitism that exists in Tsarist form and then continues in Soviet form. So one of the things you see a lot of times in Soviet propaganda is that the use of Zionist as a synonym for Jew. And you're right, that's absolutely anti-Semitic.
That's where it comes from.
But it's also important to remember that there was strong, not just religious Jewish anti-Zionism, but left anti-Zionism, the Bund, for instance, right? Long before the Soviet anti-Semitism of the 1970s, which was, whatever you think about the Bund, it was not an anti-Semitic organization. So I think, yes, I think that it is important to acknowledge that there have been currents and can continue to be currents in anti-Zionist thought or anti-Zionist individuals who are anti-Semitic. Louis Farrakhan is an anti-Zionist. He's also an anti-Semite, right? Of course, that there can be people who are anti-Zionist and anti-Semites, but I think it's important to also worth remembering that there's also a tradition of Zionist anti-Semitism. I mean, that Herzl famously said in his diaries that the anti-Semites will be our great allies, right? Because Herzl understood that there were a lot of people in Europe who didn't want Jews in Europe and would like the idea of Jews going somewhere else, right? Arthur Balfour. I mean, I know people who are literally named after Arthur Balfour, right? Who's the foreign minister of Britain when they signed the Balfour Declaration saying that they supported a Jewish home. But Balfour was a considerable anti-Semite. He had supported as prime minister the Aliens Act in 1905 that was designed to keep Eastern European immigration out. And I think if we have echoes of that Soviet anti-Semitism that can exist in the anti-Zionist world today, we also have echoes of Balfour's version of Zionist anti-Semitism today when you look at leaders like, say, Viktor Orban or people on the far right in the United States who really, really love Israel because they basically believe that every country should be dominated by one tribe. And so they see Israel as, for Jews, they say Israel is your country, right? And when you're in your country, you're terrific. You can do whatever you want. But when you're in our country, not so great, right? Even you notice that one of the bizarre linguistic tics of Donald Trump, right, over the years has been this continual referring to Jews, saying Benjamin Netanyahu is your prime minister, Israel is your country, right? This suggestion. So I think that anti-Semitism can exist in anti-Zionist forms and also in Zionist forms.
Thank you. So that's helpful. And I think one of the things that we also need to keep in mind, and is that there's an excellent, dense book called Anti-Judaism by David Nierenberg. And his thesis, which I find incredibly persuasive, good historian, is that anti-Semitism is systemic, it's endemic, it's structural in Western thought. It's not about what Jews do or don't do. It's not about Jews. It's about that Jews occupy a place in the consciousness of the culture and of the West as a group that is supposed to it's their fault, right? And this can get this metastasizes endlessly. So on the right and on the left, especially for me, amongst ideologies that are essentially binary, with victims and oppressors, or with Aryans and subhumans, or with anti-Semitism is just part of the air that we breathe. It makes it hard to think, and hard to analyze, and hard to see. None of that, I want to be clear, excuses the destruction of Gaza that Israel is engaged in. I'm not saying that. None of Palestinian oppression excuses the violence that was perpetrated on October 7th. So I'm not looking to let anybody off the hook. I'm looking to complicate, to make this messier for us. And I won't go on beyond that. Let me ask you a different question. There are organizations in the American Jewish world that are doing their best to be an alternative to what are now the lockstep Israel right or wrong APAC, ADL, others, such as J Street, such as Rabbis for Human Rights, of which I'm a member, who are such as New Israel Fund. These are organizations I've supported for years, and who are not the official voice. They're trying to counter the official voice. What is your relationship to these groups? How do you interface with them? Because that's where I live, organizationally.
Yeah, I think I think there's a range of Jewish organizations from the ones you mentioned, which I admire and respect, that operate within a kind of that oppose the occupation and fight against illiberalism inside Israel, and then other Jewish groups even further to the left, like If Not Now or Jewish Voice for Peace, that have more fundamental questions with the idea of Jewish statehood itself. I think that's fine. I mean, I think to me, and then there are, of course, non-Jewish organizations. To me, what I hope is that the movement for Palestinian liberation, which I think is also, must be a movement for Jewish liberation, because I think that one of the points that Martin Luther King and others made again and again and again is that people need to be liberated from supremacy, because there's something about being complicit in the oppression of others, in supremacy over others, that is actually psychically damaging, that separates you from your best self. And so I believe that all of these different organizations have a role to play in such a movement, and they may have disagreements, but that's fine. I mean, SNCC had disagreements with the Urban League in the civil rights movement. Any movement has different groups that oppose the Vietnam War, had different strategies and different ideas about that. So I think, to me, the core principle is, do you believe that Palestinians and Israeli Jews should be treated equally? Do you believe that Palestinians have the right to be free? Do you believe in that Israeli Jewish lives and Palestinian Jewish lives are both equally and infinitely precious? And so what gives me a sense of hope is, first, that I think there's a tremendous energy in a lot of these groups, and that many Jews are actually working with Palestinians and other people in trying to offer a vision. And the other thing that gives me a sense of hope that I think is so important is, to me, the cost of centering unconditional support for Israel in American Jewish life has not only been that it's been a catastrophe morally, I think, because it's led America's most powerful Jewish organizations to support Israel virtually no matter what Israel does. But I think it's also been catastrophic for Jews ourselves, because it has placed the relationship to the state, unconditional support for the state, at the center of Judaism. And that seems to me a very, very deep perversion of what Judaism is. You know, it's so strange to me when I see Jewish organizations that make the test of whether you are a Jew in good standing not whether you keep Shabbat or whether you keep kosher or whether you give tzedakah or whether you visit the sick or whether you wash the bodies of the dead. I mean, these are things that are foundational to Judaism, right? And yet, so often, none of those things seem to matter in people's sense of discussion, understanding of whether you are a Jew in good standing. None of them matter as much as whether you kind of pledge unconditional support for this particular state. And that, to me, has actually, I think, done great, great damage to American Jewish life. I think it even made, as I argue in the book, it deserves the label of idolatry, because it is the kind of a state is a human-made thing. And idolatry is the worship of something human-made. And so I see in so many Jewish institutions and groups like that you're talking about, in which the state is elevated to a kind of a god, to an idol, right? That criticizing or challenging it is considered a greater desecration of Judaism, right? Than the most fundamental things that we have in our tradition. And I think that's this worship of the state that has led us to the place we are now, in which whatever Israel does, the most powerful American Jewish organizations basically find some post hoc rationalization for what Israel's doing. Even if Israel is now doing things that if you had said Israel would be doing them a couple of years ago, people would literally have accused you of anti-Semitism for having the audacity to slander Israel by saying Israel is doing this. Once Israel does it, right, people say, well, it must be legitimate because Israel's doing it, right? So I remember there was a time when groups like AIPAC got very upset if you said that Israel wasn't allowing enough humanitarian aid into Gaza. And they were putting out press releases all the time saying they've let in 253 trucks and 413 trucks. Well, for the last 2 months, Israel has allowed in 0 trucks, right? It's been their public policy of no humanitarian aid in. But you don't find that the organizations then say, well, that's terrible, right? They say, well, now Israel must have a good reason to do that. We can't let it go to Hamas, right? I mean, if you had said last year, before the Trump plan, that it would be the stated policy of the Israeli government to expel all Palestinians from Gaza, I think people would have been furious at you if you had suggested that Israel might take such a position. And now Israel has taken that position. And I don't see any opposition or outrage from America's most powerful Jewish organizations. This is what I mean to call it a relationship of worship. The state is an unconditional good. The state is a good in and of itself, irrespective of how it treats the people under its control. And that seems to me to completely invert the idea that it is human beings that are created in the image of God, not states that are created in the image of God. And so states must always be judged and criticized and evaluated as only conditionally good, only valuable to the extent that they protect and safeguard the lives of the people under their control, including the people in Gaza.
I happen to agree with you, and I feel your passion. But I want to go back to where I started, which is AIPAC's not in this room. ADL is not in this room. That's not this synagogue. That's not this community. And so, yes, but what about us? Did you follow what I'm saying? It's like I heard your stump speech.
Yeah. But I mean, these are the most
I
powerful organizations that American Jews have created in 2025.
I'm not talking about American Jews. I'm talking about these American Jews who care deeply, who understand the critique, who are aware of the moral and human catastrophe taking place right now, who are watching Israel go down the fascist toilet.
So what would I say to them?
That's us.
I would say
that's us.
Right.
So I'm going to repeat. It's like I know your book is speaking to that powerful American Jewish establishment.
Yes.
That's not who I am. That's not who our community is.
Right. So what I would say to folks here, and maybe I'm preaching to the converted, is that we need to end unconditional U.S. military aid to Israel, because Israel has done what it's done in Gaza, and not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, where tens of thousands of people have been expelled from their homes because of the impunity that Israel has because of the United States, because Israel has an virtually endless unconditional supply of weaponry from the United States, even though that is in violation of the United States law, because the Leahy law says that the United States is not allowed to give weapons to elements of foreign militaries that commit gross human rights violations, and because America protects Israel from the application of international law. It's an extraordinary thing when you think about it. Benjamin Netanyahu has been indicted by the International Criminal Court for the crime of starvation. And yet he was willing to stop all humanitarian aid for 2 months, right? How could he do such a thing? Because the United States is the most powerful country in the world. Make sure that the International Criminal Court won't be able to enforce those things. So the thing I would say, that I think we should do is we should end the unconditional American military and diplomatic support that allows Israel to do the things it's doing with impunity.
Thank you. That's okay. So now I'm going to offer a counterpoint. One is that we are on such a roller coaster right now that for all we know, Donald Trump may accomplish that for us. We have no idea what's happening tomorrow. So ironically, what the Democratic establishment won't do, Trump may do. We'll see what happens. So I wanted to say that. That's like, it's a moving target right now. And It's hard to know where to position ourselves. Really hard to know where to position ourselves. But I also want to say why I don't agree with that position. Because the war in Gaza and the West Bank was also a war from Hezbollah, ballistic missiles from Iran, Houthi missiles that just landed in Ben Gurion Airport. This was a regional war against bad actors who want to destroy Israel. And this is what I want to say about it. Not that therefore the US should do X or Y, but I feel like, and this is what I want to say, I feel like the debate gets reduced to Israelis and Palestinians. And which team are you on? When what we're dealing with is an incredibly messed up geopolitical morass. And also, and this is where it gets personal, when I visited my family, several times in the last 2 years, missiles were falling. I had an app on my phone. The missiles weren't coming from Gaza. They were coming from Lebanon, and they were coming from Iran. If Israel didn't have the weaponry to fend off these attacks, which they did miraculously, if Israel didn't have the weaponry to defeat Hezbollah and in the process bring down butcher Assad, so my point is that I find that the talking point from the left about having the U.S. stop military aid to Israel is too simple.
Well, I didn't say stop military aid. I said stop unconditional military aid. I said apply the Leahy law as we should apply it to all countries.
Okay.
But I do think
no,
my
that's
analysis,
important. That's important. Thank you.
I do think my analysis of Iran, the Houthis, and Hezbollah is different from yours because I don't
talk about it in your book.
I don't see those as independent from the Palestinian issue. Even if you look at since October 7th, both the Houthis and Hezbollah, let me make it clear, both the Hezbollah and the Houthis and Hezbollah have an Islamist ideology that I profoundly oppose, just as I oppose Hamas's ideology. But the Houthis and Hezbollah have been very, very clear, right, that they will stop shooting rockets when there is a ceasefire in Gaza. And indeed, when there was a ceasefire in Gaza, the rockets generally stopped, right? Even Iran, which is a horrifying regime that I would love to see overthrown, I would love to see Ayatollah Khamenei in the dock at the International Criminal Court. Iran itself, because as part of the Islamic Conference, endorsed the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002, which said that it would recognize Israel if there was a Palestinian state near the 1967 lines and there was a just and agreed upon solution to the refugee problem. So, it is the conflict that Israel has with Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran is not separate from its conflict with the Palestinians. Let's give you an analogy. In the 1980s, South Africa was in military conflict with a whole series of neighboring countries, right? Angola, Mozambique at various points, Zambia, Tanzania, and the fundamental cause of that conflict was the support of those frontline states for black South African groups that were fighting against the regime. If Israel comes to a just agreement with the Palestinian people, I think the threats that then come from groups outside of Israel that are attacking Israel in support of the Palestinian people and using the Palestinian cause for their own aggrandizement, as Iran is doing, I think that problem becomes actually a much easier problem to deal with.
Thank you. And we watched that happen when the Oslo Accords were signed. We watched countries all over the world open diplomatic missions with Israel and economic ties as soon as those Oslo Accords were signed. So I remember that with sorrow. I remember it with sorrow that the Oslo Accords eventually unraveled, and unraveled because of extremists in Israel and extremists in the Palestinian world. The extremists won, and they've been winning ever since. So I hear you. Which leads me to a related question, which is, you speak in your book about Israel being the Jew of the nations, and how that may not, is that so? I think there's plenty of evidence that it is so. That the Jews are, that Israel in the UN and in the community of nations, whatever analogies are appropriate with other national movements, because of the strange and perverse nature of anti-Semitism, the Jews have been singled out. We do have to justify our right to exist. You know, in that term, I wanted also you to address that. You know, it's such a loaded term, our right to exist, and I want to acknowledge the emotional depth of that for Jews, because we Jews have had to claim our right to exist. So it's so emotionally dense and deep. So it's one of the reasons why I get defensive.
I appreciate it, and you're right. I think the term right to exist is powerful precisely because it conflates the right of the state to exist in a particular form as a Jewish state with the right of Jews to exist as a human being and as human beings. And to me, this is actually what's so problematic, because I said, I think that, Yeshayahu Leibovitz, who I quote in the book, who's kind of a hero of mine, when asked about the question of whether Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, again, as an Orthodox Jew, his answer was no state has a right to exist. Human beings have a right to exist. States have a right to exist only to the extent that they protect the lives of the human beings under their control. And if they radically fail in that effort, then they should be reimagined. And I actually think this is the way we think about many states, right? No, we do not believe that Iran has the right to exist as an Islamic theocracy, or that China has the right to exist under Communist Party domination, or that Russia has the right to exist under the personalist dictatorship of Vladimir Putin. I think a lot of people in this room and in Washington actually would say we could imagine political systems in those countries that would better honor the lives and dignity of the people under their control. So when you have a state in Israel that has been defined as practicing apartheid, not just by Human Rights and Amnesty International, but also by B'Tselem and Yesh Din, Israel's own most prominent human rights organizations, I think you can imagine a reimagining of the state in a way that would better honor the dignity of people, of all the people under its control. I think that you are right when you say that Israel is singled out at the United Nations General Assembly.
Thank you.
That is true. But it is also important to remember that the United States General Assembly is and was designed to be totally powerless, right? That's not a flaw. That's the way Franklin Roosevelt designed it. He designed the power at the UN to be in the United States, in the Security Council. And at the Security Council, Israel, probably more than almost any other country other than the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, has and is not just, in fact, is in the extraordinarily privileged position of basically having at least one country, and sometimes others, Britain as well, basically vetoing almost any resolution that would impose any sanctions on Israel whatsoever. So if you look at if you looked at Syria or Myanmar or Zimbabwe or Iran or North Korea or a whole series of states that are committing terrible human rights abuses, what you would find, or Sudan or Somalia or Libya, you would find that they are not as criticized at the United Nations General Assembly. Not good for them, but they are, that the United States, what the Security Council does, which is where they have the power to levy sanctions, that in fact those countries are heavily sanctioned, right? These countries, many of them have been under US and UN sanctions for years, if not decades, and often are subject of American military attack. Right? So I don't actually think, when we think about where power actually resides in the international system, that Israel is actually being singled out. I actually think Israel actually has much more impunity. Look at the International Criminal Court. Almost all of the leaders that it has prosecuted, that it has put in jail, have been in Africa. Right? It is, and no other, when the International Criminal Court acts against Russia, the U.S. supports it. It's only when it acts against Israel that the United States actually imposes sanctions on the International Criminal Court.
Thank you. This is also complicated. Karen, I'm wondering. Yeah, I think it would be great to hear some questions. I hope you're finding this worthwhile.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we're not taking questions everyone was given an index card, and they've been collated. And Karen's going to. Were they collected yet, Karen? Should we keep talking?
It's not on. There it is. Okay. Yeah, I had received some cards. So let's just start with one. I have a couple of questions here we could start with, and then we'll look at some more. Given the current policy choices by the Netanyahu government, is it worth talking at all about a one-state solution?
A one state. That was on my list.
Yeah. So I guess I would start by saying that I think a one-state solution is what exists now. I think there is one state between the Jordan and the Mediterranean. Israel, the Israeli army can go into any square inch of that territory anywhere it wants and arrest anybody it wants. And I think that I for most of my adult life supported the idea of partition, but into a Jewish and Palestinian state. I moved away from that view about 5 years ago.
And tell me why.
For a couple of reasons. First of all, it became harder and harder for me to continue to say that I supported partition between a Jewish and Palestinian state when the heartland of what would become the Palestinian state was becoming more and more fragmented by build Jewish settlements and infrastructure. I felt like I was constantly in this position of saying the two-state solution is about to die. And then actually it was a Palestinian friend who at some point said to me, Peter, something can't be perpetually dying. At some point it's dead. I actually went back and looked, John Kerry in I think it was 2012 said he thought there were about 18 months more or 2 years before the two-state solution was no longer possible. In 1982, Anthony Lewis in the New York Times wrote a column called 5 Minutes to Midnight, saying that if there were 100,000 settlers in the West Bank, it would be impossible. So what I find has happened with the two-state solution, as the settler population has grown and grown and grown, with this massive, essentially permanent infrastructure that Israel has built, the only way to preserve the idea of a two-state solution is to keep defining down what the state actually is, what the Palestinian state would be, right? It would not have genuine sovereignty. It would be pocketed by settlements and infrastructure all over. That's what the Trump plan was, right? And the other reason that I moved away from it is I think that the idea of the two-state solution is, as conventionally understood, is designed to maintain a Jewish majority but within smaller borders. And so what that means is that Palestinian refugees can't be allowed to return, because if they returned, they could undermine that Jewish majority. Palestinians might come and the Jewish majority might go down from 80% to 70% or 60% or whatever. And I began to just ask myself, what's the ethical position that allows me to tell a Palestinian that I have the right to return to this place after 2,000 years, even though my family hasn't lived there in a very, very, very long time. But you don't have the right to return to the place that you were born in 1948. I know Palestinian refugees who were born in 1948, and I know many more of their children and grandchildren. Can I really look them in the eye and say that my connection to this place is so much more profound than yours, that it means so much more to me than to you? And so I began to believe that I didn't have an ethical position in opposing Palestinian refugee return, the right of Palestinians to return, and that this language that I was involved in of trying to maintain a particular Jewish demographic majority was the kind of language that when I heard it in the United States, it was coming from people like Tucker Carlson, right? That this language of maintaining demographic majorities isn't the way that I believe states should work. Because one of the things it does is that it means if you're not of the right demographic group, you're never really an equal citizen, right? Imagine what it's like for a Palestinian citizen of Israel, an Arab Israeli, right? When they have a child, and it's their greatest simcha for them, but they know that for the state, their child is a demographic threat, because God forbid the Palestinian population of citizens could go from 20 to 25% or 30%, right? That's not the way I think states should behave. And so because I believe Palestinian citizens should be allowed to be treated equally, and because I believe that Palestinian refugees deserve the right to return, that's also part of the reason I moved away from partition towards the idea of one equal binational state.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me make a couple of addendum to that. Um, in the Oslo Accords, the right of return was a big issue, which was, if I recall correctly, going to be handled by giving folks the symbolic right of return and compensating them. Think about and again, analogies are all partial, but India and Pakistan involved a huge, millions of Muslims and Hindus fleeing away from their homes to these new countries that were being established. So I just wanted to mention that there have been solutions on the table in the past. However, like Peter, I've watched the two-state solution die. I don't have a solution. I humbly and openly acknowledge right now that I don't have a solution, that I feel like I'm witnessing a tragedy, a catastrophe, and I don't have a solution. And because the one-state idea, while in theory is sound and ethical, there's no evidence that either a vast majority of Israelis or Palestinians would opt for this solution. So I have come to the conclusion at this point that I'm going for any solution that involves less killing and an opportunity for people to breathe and live their lives. And that is not a big vision that I have. I'm just sharing with you where I'm at. But the other thing I want to say is,
can I just say one thing on this?
Of course you may.
Just a short point. There's a lot of what you said that I think is very valid. Where I think I would disagree is I think you are absolutely right that the vast majority of Israeli Jews would not support anything like the idea of one equal state. But I don't think that's true for Palestinians. I think actually that you would find overwhelming support among Palestinians for a state in which they had political equality with Jews. And certainly that's been my experience as someone who speaks to Palestinians on a very regular basis.
Thank you. Now what I want to say is that we live in a world organized into nation states. That's how the world's organized. Every nation state, with the possible exception of the U.S., is ethnically based. And that doesn't mean that an ethnic state cannot guarantee rights to its minorities under a democratic legal system. So it's confusing to me when Israel, let me put it this way. If you're opposed to the idea of nation states, it's who dreamed that up anyway? It's like, you have to have like a flag, and you create a mythology of your history, and you have your famous people and your lore. It's like, okay, it's a way to organize. It's 250 years old. Before that, we did kingdoms and empires. It's like, so my point is that I find it suspect when people say Israel can't be. I think a country can be an ethical and democratic place with an ethnic majority. Why, Israel's Declaration of Independence, which is not like the Constitution, but is an aspirational document, declares that Israel will be a place that guarantees the rights of all its citizens, regardless of religion, race, or creed. That's in the Declaration of Independence. They're failing miserably.
Right. I think that. Sorry, I didn't mean.
Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
I find my anti.
Right.
Let me put it this way: my anti-Semitism antenna go up when Israel gets singled out as the only ethnic state that couldn't possibly exist.
Right. I think you
follow what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's worth thinking about a spectrum, right? So I think there are many states that fall short of this principle of equality under the law, and we could look at European states that have crosses on their flags, right? There are a lot of European countries that have crosses on their flags. But and to me, that's an offense against the principle of equality in law. I would not want to, I would be very unhappy if someone suggested putting a cross on the flag of the United States. So I wouldn't be thrilled if I were living in Britain or many European countries that have a cross on their flags. But if we think about a spectrum of between equality under the law here and kind of group supremacy on the other, Israel is much further on one side of that than other countries that we would think about as democracies. And let me give you a few just examples about the state. First of all, Israel has a segregated school system, right? I mean, I'm not talking about the West Bank, Gaza, East. I'm talking about inside the Green Line. Israel has a segregated school system, right? It does not.
That's an Americanism. It's like there's an Arab language school system. There's a religious language.
And
school
why
system,
is that?
Why is
because
it?
Because the Palestinian citizens asked to go to segregated inferior schools.
I understand that they wanted to be able to learn in their own language.
I mean, maybe they would like to be able to.
I'm not making that up.
I mean, this was not this school system, which has Jewish tracts and Palestinian tracts, was not created by Palestinians, right? It was created by a Jewish state, right? And I'm sure Palestinians would like to be able to learn in Arabic and perhaps to be learned as Hebrew as a second language. But the point is, they were not the authors of this system, which is at best separate but equal, right? And in fact is not even equal, right? Secondly, Israel has no civil marriage, right? So there is no right to get married inside the state of Israel across religious lines, right?
Two Jews can't even do it without.
Absolutely, right? But so, and beyond that, Israel has a series of institutions that were created from the Yishuv before the state that have great power that don't function for the good of all of Israel's citizens. Again, I'm only talking about inside the Green Line now. So look at land. Something like 93% of the land in Israel is controlled by the Israel Land Authority. It parcels out this land for long-term lease by industry, agriculture, municipalities. It has 22 seats. 12 of the seats go to the cabinet. 10 of the seats go to the Jewish National Fund. The Jewish National Fund, in its own mission statement, develops land for the use of Jews, right? And so if you understand this, you start to understand why Palestinian municipalities are massively overcrowded inside Israel, because they're never given the land that would allow them to expand, right? And that why the vast majority of home demolitions, even inside Israel proper, are of Palestinian homes, because Palestinian municipalities are so massively overcrowded. Because imagine if most of the land in America were state land, and it was controlled by an institution that basically gave almost half of its seats to people who believed in the development of land only for Christians. This is the way the Israeli state functions for Palestinians. And this is why the state is much further along the spectrum towards group supremacy than most other countries that we would even consider to be democracies.
Thank you. Those are strong arguments, and I hear you. A little balance. No, I don't mean that as I don't mean that to negate anything he said. My sister-in-law spent her career at Oranim College, a teachers' college in the Galilee, which trains Israeli Arab teachers and Jewish teachers together. They all go to the same teachers' college. They learn in different. They have some classes together, some separate. Israeli healthcare and other, there are aspects of Israeli society that do make the effort to create equal access. It's not all one or the other. But Peter's arguments about that's his spectrum based on the mission, the initial mission of Zionism to recreate out from the diaspora, a homeland for the Jewish people who were under threat of extermination. And we forget, it's so easy to forget, the debased and horrible nature of anti-Semitism in the 20th century. We also forget, and I know this, that yes, Israel was created as a haven for the Jews. Was that a necessity? Well, it can be argued that it is. I'm sorry that the world is such a dangerous and deadly place. But there are also legitimate arguments and points to claim that the Jewish people need this. And so here we are once again with an insoluble conundrum. for me. How about another question?
Maybe just one more question. It's already.
Oh.
This went really fast. Okay. Identify as an American Jew, not an Israeli Jew. I support Israel, but I do not agree with its government. What is a productive way to express this without feeling alienated, without being branded an anti-Semite? What is what? What's a good way to go forward?
Yeah.
Give it a go.
I mean, I think the discourse about anti-Semitism has become really, really toxic. I think it's part of the roots of that is this insistence by powerful Jewish organizations on the idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, which I think, as you rightly said, this completely negates the Palestinian experience, right? How could Palestinians not be anti-Zionist? Even if you think that Zionism is the best thing that ever happened to the Jewish people, how can you think that Palestinians would not have a problem with this, right? It starts with their expulsion in 1940, and it kind of goes downhill from there, right? And so, and then other people who identify with the Palestinian cause and feel like there's something wrong and listen to Palestinians also then might be attracted to these ideas of seeing Zionism as an oppressive and illiberal force. And so this equation of anti-Zionism, which has been pushed so much by American Jewish organizations, I think is part of what is now the clay that Donald Trump is now using in this effort to try to create this authoritarian regime, right? And to attack universities by saying that under the name of the claim that they're anti-Semitic. And I think that it is really a terrible and tragic thing that in this effort to protect Israel by accusing its harshest critics of being anti-Semites, you actually now have created this environment in which Donald Trump has this rhetorical weapon that he can use to try to basically destroy independent institutions in the United States that are fundamental to us remaining a liberal democracy. I mean, there is really, to see American Jewish organizations be complicit in the destruction of America's universities, given what universities have meant to American Jews, is really, really chilling to me. So I think the first thing I guess I would say to this person is defend the right of people to question, to criticize not just Benjamin Netanyahu, but even to question and criticize the notion of Jewish supremacy without being called anti-Semitic. If there is evidence that people are anti-Semitic, then you have the right to call them anti-Semitic. But you need some other form of evidence beyond the fact that that they believe in human equality and they are opposed to an ideology that they see as being in violation of human equality. And so I think that would be the first thing I would say. We have to, as Jews, I think we have to be willing to stick our necks out to allow people of goodwill who are not Jewish to be able to feel like they can enter this conversation without constantly being fearful that they would be called anti-Semitic. It's really painful to watch because the truth is the reason that anti-Semitism shuts down conversation is precisely because anti-Semitism has been used for such horrifying things in human history. And so the better a person you are, the more you fear being called an anti-Semite, right? And so people desperately don't want to be called anti-Semites, partly because they know it could put their jobs and their reputations at risk, but partly because they don't want to be associated with something which is so horrifying. And yet many, many good-hearted American people, the same kind of people who were on the front lines opposing the Vietnam War and opposing segregation and opposing apartheid, they can see with their own eyes that this state is doing things that is not right and that our government should not be supporting that. And when we slander those people, I think we are taking this precious inheritance that we have from prior generations of Jews who suffered so much because of anti-Semitism, and we're desecrating it by using it as a cheap political tactic because, frankly, it's impossible to defend what Israel's actually doing on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank. And so anti-Semitism is the only card you can play because if you actually try to talk about what Israel's doing in Gaza and the West Bank, it's impossible to defend it.
I also want to, I thank you. I also want to remind everyone that there are many Israelis who feel the same way. And we're not taking questions from the floor, sorry. No, hands up. Oh, Israelis raising their hands. Right, right. There are many Israelis and in Israel
And in the room.
who are,
And in the room.
and in the room, who are as bereft, as horrified, as we are as American citizens about what's happening in our country. And so I want to encourage everyone here not to lump all Israelis into one category. Because, again, we live in a culture that wants us to be rooting for our team in the most puerile sort of like way, like, you know, my country right or wrong, or all this stuff, and wants us all to be, our attention to be grabbed and have us be riled up. We understand what the world of digital media does to us. They're actively trying to get us upset. Please, as my colleague Rabbi Shir, Mayor of Fight, wrote, what do we want? Nuance. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Nuance. When do we want it? Now. So that is that's my contribution to this, to Peter's passionate and valid charge to us. Okay.
All right, I think we're going to have to stop.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Very good. Thank you. Yeah, it was great. No, I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
So I think they moved the tables. Anyone who wants to do any book signing, I don't know if the tables are in the back. Did that happen?
Where in the back?
To the back corner, possibly.
Of the lobby?
No, in this room. So,
Oh, this room. Okay.
yeah, I think they were going to be in the back of this room.
Be kind, everybody. Be kind.
And
each other.
Just one more thing before we go. I just wanted to let you know that last week we had some really beautiful conversations. Our online was a little too many people. We had 80 people online. It was hard to do the actual work. We had a beautiful conversation here in the building. I would like to invite anybody who wants to, and this is a little spontaneous, but I had to know how this evening went, to extend the invitation. We're going to meet here tomorrow at 7 p.m. I have a few facilitators, and we'll hold the space for us. And I put some little questions and things to consider on a piece of paper. And so we'll use those prompts and maybe something else, and we'll break into small groups.
So
and we'll
you
just
have a
talk
chance
together.
to talk.
And so we'll all have a chance to talk. Anybody who wants to, we'll figure it out. I'll send out an email. We'll send out an email tomorrow morning that'll have the link to this recording and also the invitation to be here tomorrow. We are going to look for more opportunities for us to talk with each other and also plan some Zoom sessions. I have some, I've been working with some people in the last year and a half that include Jewish Israelis, Palestinian Israelis, and West Bank Palestinians that we've been doing peace work there over all these months, and they're eager to come here and talk to us as well. So we'll continue that work together. And next Tuesday, it's also on that little piece of paper. Take that home. Please come back next week for Joey Weisenberg, who's going to be here for a concert in the Woodstock. Let's have a few hours of peace, love, and music together and just sing together in the room. So thank you all for coming. Thank you.